Hello, and welcome to Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations. I'm your host, Nicholas McKay. Today, we're joined by Ashley Colby. Ashley is an environmental sociologist, homesteader, author, and the co-founder of Rizoma School, an executive director at Rizoma Foundation and Loconomy project. Welcome to Conversations, Ashley.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first off, Ashley, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Chicago, in the city of Chicago. My dad is a Chicago firefighter, or was retired. So there's requirements with that you have to live within the city limits. So we did. I grew up on the south side of the city in like a leafy Chicago neighborhood, lots of working class people, a lot of police officers as well. Kind of a public school kid. Super diverse public school. Then I went to a Catholic, all-girls Catholic high school, which was interesting. And it's kind of like a sort of Catholic, Irish, Polish ancestry around here, where I grew up. And so my background is basically a city kid, public school, city kid, working class. My trajectory kind of changed relative to a lot of people I grew up with when I got a scholarship to college. That kind of set me in, sort of a different path. But yeah, that's my background.
Yeah, Chicago's great. I lived there. It was my second city, like a lot of people. So I lived there for a couple years after school because I went to school in Illinois. So it was very interesting 3 years. I was in there for the snowpocalypse 2012.
Nice.
The polar vortex and stuff. So
yeah, we were there at the same time then. That's funny.
Yeah, it was intense. I remember like the snow drifts, how they had to bring in the earth movers and stuff because the plows like literally couldn't get through. And it's like,
yeah,
whoa.
Everybody has those memories of those of snow events. There was one time where I was staying in a part of Chicago with Patrick in his home, and it was like you open the door and like up to waist level was snow,
Yeah.
And it's just like got the imprint of the door on it.
That's wild.
Yeah,
I remember seeing like snowdrifts so high, but then when it shut down the city of Chicago and knowing that Chicago gets so much snow constantly every year,
right.
I was very surprised. And then when I saw that Lakeshore Drive, the buses for the CTA,
people just abandoned their cars.
Buses, and it was like, wait a second, I saw this in like day after tomorrow. Am I living like through this like apocalyptic thing? And it's like, man, this is foreshadowing of sorts, So that was an interesting thing. But I mean, I'm actually gonna go to Chicago. You've been around there for the summer. Summertime shy is real. That's one of my favorite things. The bars and everything. You were on the south side. I was more on the north side. So tell me about that a little bit. Maybe we can start the distinction off of that. Like cultural differences from the north side, south side is
huge,
very there and apparent.
Yeah, huge. So it's like Sox versus Cubs, I guess. The Cubs fans are like, they wear button-up shirts and to the games, and it's just about like, I don't know. In some ways, the Sox fans are resentful of the Cubs fans, but it's like the north-south divide in so many places. But yeah, it's the north siders are more cultured, more affluent in general.
Yeah.
South siders more working class, a little rowdier. I mean, I guess they both kind of get rowdy in their own ways.
Sure.
But yeah, the south side, at least where I grew up, it's like this sort of working class cosmopolitanism, and if I could call it that. We grew up with lots of different kinds of people, found ways to get along. There's lots of different races and ethnicities that are sort of cohabiting happily in these different neighborhoods. There's definitely a history of segregation and such around the whole city, but I would say in general, part of what I wrote about in my book, because my book research was based on interviews in Chicago, was that the South Side is just sort of treated as this like, gang-ridden, segregated, and like those issues exist, but it's not just one monolithic thing. The South Side is many things, just like every place is many things. So
very true.
Yeah.
Well said. And so what exactly, with that cosmopolitanism and when that working class, like how did that kind of influence what you wanted to be when you grew up? Like, it was that kind of, you said you got a scholarship, which was kind of different from a lot of people around you, to kind of get out. And I can kind of attest to that. A lot of people from Chicago, one of the reasons why, you know, I kind of fell out with even a lot of my West Side friends and out in the suburbs is like, they just want to live in Chicago and they just want to come back to there, which was great and all, but you know, it just runs deep. And so I guess you could say like, how did that kind of influence what you wanted to be when you grew up, and then how you actually went about it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I kind of fell for the narrative that a lot of people do, which is just like, I've got to get out of this place. Like, I'm so different from this place and these people. And then kind of went on a whole long trajectory of, you know, going to different places. I went to the University of Chicago, which is, it's on the South Side, but it's like a world apart from the place where I grew up. And then I've traveled a ton, and I was just like, what is out there in the world? I just insatiable curiosity, like, where do I land? Where do I fit? Through all of grad school, where then I came back to Chicago to do my dissertation research, which included interviewing people in Chicago and in the suburbs and in the rural area south of the city, and kind of like developed a newfound love of place here. You know, I think that in general, we're sort of told this idea like people are, you know, wherever you're from are, you know, I think of like Boiled Owl, Neil Clark, you know, this yokels, everyone is yokels around me. I need to get away from these people. But then, you know, I'm starting to, you know, just over the past, I guess, half a decade or so, coming to appreciate like the beauty of locality, not just my own locality, but the localities that I have been a part of or adjacent to, or, you know, even a visitor in. I think there's something really beautiful about that. Locality and belonging and that kind of thing. So now I'm almost kind of like a person who has been in both worlds and can translate between. For people, there's like a lot of people who've been in academia and just, you know, are still in the mindset of like, get away from these backwards people kind of thing. And then there's a lot of people who have no experience of academics and are like, they're elite, annoying, trying to tell us how to live people. And so it's nice that for me, it's really nice that I have had experiences of both, and I can sort of help to translate between the two groups of the culture war.
Yeah, right. And then, so who would you say, or maybe not who or what, it can be a lot of things. And you kind of already said where, I guess locality has been that. Is what are some of the people or influences that kind of stroked your curiosity first off? Like for me, it was really books and, you know, films and things like that. But for you, what was that?
Yeah, I think I don't like, at least before I went to college, I just sort of thought like, my uncle was like the most cosmopolitan, as in, you know, outside of
as uncles usually are, you know.
Like this person who like really influenced me, he like had a job in New York City, he worked for Comedy Central, like you know, he's just like this kind of guy who could open up my eyes to like a whole different side of the world. And you know, went to fancy restaurants and stayed in fancy hotels. And he went with me to visit the University of Chicago one time when I was still in high school, when I was still applying there. And I saw these people protesting for like some sort of environmental issue. And I had no idea what they were against or for or why.
Yeah.
And I was like, just so intensely curious. Like, I just want to be a person who is informed on these things, which I am now.
Right.
But I just was basically like, I really admire these people who have educated themselves enough to know what's going on with these issues and then taking a stand on them and then try to do some change relative to these things. I mean, now it's funny that I kind of don't really advocate for a protest type action because I don't think it like makes a big difference. But at the time when I was a teenager, I just thought like, wow, these people, like, they're so, you know, respectable. They're doing what they believe in. They find out what they believe in. To me, that was like a really cool moment. And then basically it was just like a long trajectory to get myself educated enough to have opinions about things that I felt confident in having. And I still feel like that process is ongoing. You know, I think in general, a lot of times, especially among academics, you make an opinion based on your whole set of studies or, you know, experiences or research, et cetera. And then you kind of like get fossilized in it a lot of times. You know, this is my area of expertise. And if somebody brings me new information, they kind of just say like, please refer to my body of work, you know, and they just like, this is what I think. Yeah. Or like, you know, I've established what I think. So, you know, come and just read what I think because I've already thought it and it's done. And in general, I just think the world is so complex. Like there's so much to know. There's whole like rabbit holes I haven't even tried to go down because I just think like, if I go down this rabbit hole, I'm not coming out for years. You know what I mean? I can't even like start thinking about these things. So I've kind of focused my attention on like global supply chains, agriculture, and just like sort of local grassroots movements. But there's so much more out there to know about. So yeah, in general, I still take that attitude of like open curiosity and also admitting when I don't know what I'm talking about or I don't have the expertise to say, because I think a lot of people, you know, you're thought of as an expert in something, and so can you give an opinion about this other thing? Like, oh no, I'm not going to sound silly. It just sounds silly if I try to pretend I have an opinion on that, or I'll learn something later on and go back and be like, my opinion was so wrong. I should have just said I don't know.
Right. And but I think that that's like a practice of like intellectual humility. And obviously, if you want to really get down to it, if you want to break around all the politics and et cetera, like what really the scientific method is trying to do, or you know, trying to get into it, and just like Bayesian reasoning, you know, really of just like, hey, let's keep taking more information, let's keep applying it. And then I think one of the things that you have been lauded about, and Twitter, we'll get about like how Twitter can be used as an influence a little bit later on. But Joe Norman has talked a lot about, you know, theory into practice. And I think that's one of the things that you've been especially, or at least I've been tuned in and primed to since he said that. And I've been really kind of trying to even translate that into me. And like, because I'm very philosophical, I'm very thought oriented, very meta, but then at the same time, I think I share a lot of the things with you. You know, my mother is from the hills of Tennessee. You know, she didn't have running water till she was 16 years old. You know, that was 1972, you know, so it's like, yeah, that's not that long ago, you know. So it's like I have a visceral history, you know, with coal mining and, you know, all those kinds of like things and the opioid crisis. So like I get the practice oriented on the other side of like expertise and stuff. So I guess maybe let's just riff on that subject a little bit about theory to practice. And then you even said a little bit of your maybe not naivety, but every young person, when they see some passionate people, they get passionate. You know, it's almost like a kind of feed off. So maybe talk about how, you know, your own journey coming from more that passion of theory into like, okay, well, how does that exactly translate into practice? And then not just practice, but like when you fail, because a lot of people just stop there at the practice. They try one practice and then it doesn't work. And then it's game over and we're done and everything sucks. And it's like, well, you're only like halfway there, really, you know, at that point, you know? And so it's like, so let's just riff on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I love Joe. Joe and I have shared so much a similar worldview. It's been so nice to meet, you know, a lot of the people on Twitter. You feel like, these are my people. But yeah, it's interesting. I think that the theory and practice thing, now that we just started talking about this earlier on, like it really does mirror the sort of like academic versus non-academic, working class, local is whatever group, because I think in general, the theory people are like, you know, the highest form of anything is just reasoning and thinking your way through things and like thinking the right thing or using your big galaxy brain to solve problems. And then the practical people, I'm thinking of somebody like Scratchy Johnson, who I love. He's so grounded in reality in a way that I really admire and wish to be someday. That he's like asking just super, super simple practical questions when somebody comes up with like this high level theoretical idea that's just so obviously not ground tested, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And so
in the field, you know,
in the field. And this is my whole thing about, like, I came to this conclusion via academia, where I talked about this moment I had in an environmental sociology class, talking about how scientists were studying these salmon populations, and the ones who made a computer model in comparison to the ones who went out and counted the fish, the computer model people were like so off relative to the people who counted the fish. And I was just like light bulb moment. Yes, of course, counting the fish would be better. Like, just go out into the world and count the fish if you want to know what's going on. Like, sometimes you can't do that, but you know what I mean? In general, we should be tending toward, like, you know, understanding the world as close to the world as possible, which then sets me on a pathway to really love and appreciate the people who are doing that all the time. And a lot of the people who are doing that all the time are like mechanics and carpenters and plumbers and home builders. And this is like, I've really gravitated towards a lot of people who do things with their hands, because, you know, they're sort of the best systems thinkers out there. They're the ones who are like, you know that it's trial and error, and which is more or less how the scientific method is supposed to work. It's supposed to be like, you throw something out in the world is messy, either it comes back, your hypothesis is correct or incorrect. And like, they're constantly testing their hypothesis, you know? Whereas people who are just in their head reading papers based on, for example, global aggregate data, which loses a lot in the midst of what it's trying to describe, because aggregating data at that level is so disconnected from what the way data is collected on the ground and like what it's describing. And obviously the people who collect that data and aggregate it have to make value judgments all along the line as to what is this describing, what are my assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff doesn't really go into the final paper. What comes out is something like, you know, land use change over time. And then, you know, you don't really know what all the assumptions are underneath there. And then you get this huge disconnect between, for example, people who do regenerative agriculture and have done it for many generations in like the UK, for example, being demonized when, you know, because these people who look at aggregate global data and are all theory are saying like, this for sure should not exist. You need to go away. My global aggregate data says so.
And we put so much emphasis on data that like that alone is now like king of the cat. You know, it's like the creme de la creme. Same along with like peer review studies. You know?
Exactly. And then imagine like getting a peasant coming in there and being like, look, I'm building soil, I've got biodiversity, I'm sequestering carbon, my water table's better. I don't have any flooding on my land. Like I have, my land is cooler than everyone else's around me because I have, you know, agroforestry practices, all this stuff. And it's like the qualitative, you know, that just can't really be captured in the same way as this quantitative stuff, which people who love theory worship. And so then it just becomes this sort of like battle of classes then, because like the class people who love the aggregate data are the ones in power more or less, you know, and the ones who are the ones out doing the practical stuff on the ground are not. And so now I've sort of turned to advocate for these practical people to the extent that I have any privilege at all. I try to use it to say like, let's take a look at these people who like know these things and do these things and have something to teach us, you know?
Yeah. It's almost like when you were talking about the, I don't know, about how it's going and it doesn't stop. Like it almost has a mind of its own. It's almost like the art of deduction, you know, Sherlock Holmes gone wrong, you know, and it's like, we always put like this emphasis on, you know, like these experts and getting it. And that character really personifies like, you know, using the scientific, everything. And he may be hoodwinked every now and then, but he'll come around, you know, but it's like, everyone thinks they're, you know, they've got it all figured out. And it's like, no, like you really don't. And I think what you just said about the maintainers, or I mean, sorry, I said, I'm going to say something about the maintainers, but you were talking about the plumbers and the electricians and the people that like really keep, you know, this world going and everything like really it is very important. And I'm going to grad school this fall in the STS discipline, so science, technology, and society. And that's a really interesting kind of subset of things, is like how things are maintained. I mean, we just saw, what is it, in Miami, the building just fell down, and 2 days before there was a structural engineer trying to do a pool thing, and he just found it. And then all of a sudden it comes down, bridges, et cetera. So it's like and then you want to talk about economies and work and stuff. It's like there's so much there, I guess you could say. But let's, I guess, parse into localism maybe versus like Cosmo-Localism versus global, So I want to make a distinction too that someone made. A lot of people in today's world critique globalism, and rightly so, for supply chains, fragility. We saw the Suez Canal kind of stuff. But another thing I think, something that people need to think about is maybe not globalism or global is planetariety, like almost thinking at that high of level of that this is like kind of a spaceship. And I've written some things on, how that we're always, we're flying into space, as an updated operating manual for Spaceship Earth, influenced by Buckminster Fuller. But like, what is that kind of difference of seeing in scales? Because you just talked about class. Well, we're on a global class, if you really want to talk about it in terms of East, West, indigenous, in terms of the effects of climate change, economics. And so maybe let's just parse out some of those kind of differences between like thinking about the global, kind of issues, but not in a globalist way, and then thinking about localism in a way, but doesn't, personify itself only with the local, and doesn't, think about the most pressing problems that all of us are going to face now that we live in, 2021. So
yeah, that's a great question. So I again, thinking about how I've had this conversation with Joe and Jason, especially, but
Jason Snyder for everyone.
Jason Snyder, Cognosor. So basically, the way that I think about scale is, I was talking about this with Jason and Trace Crow, whose Twitter handle is Doge at Crow, the other day. Basically, my sense is that we need to focus on local practices that make sense in local contexts, but we can think about global or larger scale. It doesn't have to be global. It could be regional, statewide, nationwide, or global principles. I think principles make sense on any scale and actually can be very helpful when you're thinking on larger scales. Like, what are the principles that are guiding this? What are our values, basically? Yes. So, if I take a look at the way somebody's practicing small scale agriculture in England versus Uruguay versus Nigeria versus, Kentucky, there are very similar principles at play. And I think thinking about those principles that guide us and hold us together and connect our thriving, our simultaneous mutual thriving, can really help us to think about, like, global solidarity movements, or how can we help peasants in India and Africa and Kentucky who are all doing the same thing, guided by these principles of care for the land and care for local people and community, and et cetera. Then when you start to put those principles into practice, the way that those principles play out in practice, I think should have a scale that makes sense to whatever it is that the endeavor that you're engaged in. So Joe talks about how it doesn't always just have to be local scale, but it should be the minimum possible scale for the problem at hand. And I really like that idea. And I'm thinking back to that Miami example. Part of what was going on there is just this scale that sort of outsources responsibility and allows for corruption. It's just like, oh, someone else will take care of it, or there are these guidelines for how construction is supposed to be done, and this inspector did it and this inspector, but none of the people are talking to each other. My understanding is that had something to do with quality of concrete, and that's I didn't look into this deeply, so I might be one of those moments where I look back and say that opinion was wrong. But I read something about how there's like corruption associated with the quality of concrete because the concrete can get cut with other materials that are cheaper, because then that increases the amount of profit and you know, at the expense of structural quality and which then just integrity. And so it just brings us back to this class distinction. It's just like, you know, power, and I honestly think like these class and power dynamics are going to play out. They've played out throughout all of history. But when you get to a scale that enables global ways of doing things, a lot of things get outsourced. And so for me, the promise of localism is almost like the promise of holding others accountable and being held accountable, knowing what people are doing. It's legibility, like just even being able to understand what's going on with your neighbors. Like right now you go to the store, you have no idea where this stuff came from, how it was processed, what's happening to the people who produced it. All of that stuff is outsourced and made to be external to our consciousness. And so to me, the scale is just so far out of whack that it's got to like go so much further in the other direction. So I tend to advocate for that. But I traveled to like 35 countries between college and grad school. I love travel. I think that it's so important to understand other people's lives and struggles and to find common ground and to see what shared principles or values we have. I think like if there were any sort of spaceship moment for me, it's that, like seeing our struggle as intertwined and similar, and that we're all kind of striving for similar, not practical outcomes, but similar goals, you know, like health, safety, security, community, beauty, you know, these kinds of things. And the way that those play out are different for different cultures and individuals. But, you know, like finding the ways in which we're the same, I think is so key, while also cultivating strong local ties, which I think does sometimes mean exclusivity. You know, we're just an inclusive group. We all have this set of values. We found each other. We work together. We're committed to it. For example, it could be just a place. You know, our inclusivity is south side of Chicago. Our inclusivity is, I lived in Pullman, Washington, the Palouse. You know, we all love this bioregion. If in the parlance of a lot of the bioregionalists, you know, we love it. It's our place. We want to care for this place, and there's inclusivity in that, and that's okay. You know, I think in general we just take these really maximalist positions, like all exclusivity is bad. You know, we can't be exclusive. We have to. Everybody needs to be included all the time. Well, some kinds of exclusivity are good. They can breed a kind of pride and care. You know, so I think just having those nuanced views is so key.
Yeah, because if you lose the context, you can easily get into this like you know, chimpanzee us versus them, you know, mentality of just like warring. And it's like, it doesn't really matter about what the idea is, who the people are, where you're from. It just gets into this like eternal battle of good versus evil. And then we're back at square one. You know, I thought we had progressed, you know what I mean? And been enlightened and everything else. So, but interesting you say that in a lot of ways, because I think some of those principles is first thing I was thinking of is like transparency. You know, the reason why, you know, you and I don't know what's in the supply chains and everything is because, you know, we have this large business and industry edifice like that's completely supplanted on because of this, you know, economic structure that, you know, you and I didn't vote for, we didn't put together for, you know, whatever. But then now you're really seeing which gives me hope, you know, in a lot of different ways is these things springing up out of the woodwork in between these. And so I guess now let's talk about, even though you might be within a system and within, you know, the confines of things, variables need to be changed, et cetera. You know, what are some of the principles of, I guess, the continuation? I mean, we'll get into doomer optimism in a little bit. So maybe let's just talk about optimism in general. Like how do you even go about doing that? Is it more of or you personally, do you go about solving problems in more of a, you know, let's look at it from 5,000 feet up and really, you know, tone in on exactly all the different intricacies? Or do you feel it out? Like what is the most pressing thing at this moment? Or even more the most impactful? What is the most newsworthy, you know, et cetera? So how do you go about like looking at these different issues, seeing it, and then also, you know, having an optimism? And we'll get into doomer optimism specifically later, but like in general.
Yeah. So basically, I had this aha moment in college where I took this class called Is Development Sustainable? Just it's, answering the question throughout the class,
Okay. Yeah.
development meaning economic development, like building things. And there's always these words, sustainable development, and the question of the class was, is development sustainable? Like, should we even be saying those two words together? And in that class, like my environmental consciousness just totally exploded. I had no idea about all these environmental problems. And so one aha moment I had in that class was basically, this is the problem. This is the problem set of problems to be solved throughout the rest of our lifetimes. And it's not just environment, like the environment is connected to like the economic, the social, the political, the financial, all this stuff. So like I just think environment is one strong way in which people are connected to seeing a problem, to recognizing it. Like they care about the earth, they care about life on earth. So it's one way to recognize that there is a problem. But I think it's just the whole environmental movement or set of problems it's just the symptoms of a larger problem. You know what I mean? It's all systemic. It's all systemic. So I had this aha moment that was basically like, we all have a role to play in this. Like, if we're to solve this problem, it's going to be like all of us doing a bunch of tiny things until we all work together enough to figure out the solution. And I was like, oh, there's so much potential here. Like, this is crazy. I can't believe how much potential there is to solve this stuff. And like, at the time I was thinking like, we just need jobs and like this in solar panels, and there's so many jobs out there and stuff like that. And I was just thinking along those lines. Now, the way I think about it is more or less like historical materialism is a way of thinking that it's not totally deterministic, but it's basically like, we know that history goes, you have certain lessons from history, sort of things happen you can learn from the past. And one historical materialist take that really helps me to wrap my mind around how social change happens is called dual process theory by this professor who now lives in Mexico named Morris Berman. And the dual process theory is basically like societies fail. And when they fail, other societies grow. So he was talking about like the end of the Roman Empire. And as that failed and faltered, there were all sorts of moments where you could say like, oh, it's truly failed now, crossed the Rubicon, but really that was not the total end. And then in the midst of that failure, there were all these sort of like mystery cults starting up, and they were all similar to Christianity in structure and form. And then, sort of Christianity took a hold. It had enough adherents that it then became the next world order. And then, it sort of like changed from the Roman Empire to the Holy Roman Empire, and it became Christianity was the next world order in Europe at that time. So I just think we're probably in a period now of decline of one world system. Again, like the scale is just so wildly out of proportion to any past empires, but it's still the same kind of like dominant world system that's failing. And when a system fails, a lot of the things people rely on, even for basic things like food or sanitation, transport, that kind of stuff, it fails with the failing society. The society fails to provide what it once was able to provide. And then when that happens, people have to seek out some alternative means of doing things, accessing food or making buildings that don't crumble, whatever. And so basically, people are forced to invent alternatives. And that's what I'm interested in. And it's not really that much of a conscious process. A lot of the times people come to food production, for example, because they're like, either there was times where I couldn't access food on the shelves, where there was some kind of disaster, and that really freaked me out. I don't know the quality of the food on the shelves. I don't trust these things. There's no good food in my neighborhood, for example. And it's just, to me, that's just a whole host of failures of the system. And so then these people like go and seek out some other way to access food because the system is not providing it in the way that they would like. And so for me, I think it's what's really positive about that is that anything that sort of upsets you about the way the world is, and anything you're pulled towards to create that is solves your actual problems, but you also love and care about, like, go do it. You know what I mean? So for me, it was like having chickens and planting fruit trees and getting cattle for the first time. Like, to me, I'm really interested in how all those systems work. So I want to try it. And it simultaneously solves the problem. Like, if we don't have access to global food for some reason, I'll have this food. And so, you know, I think, like, if I start to think about solutions, I think of them as multi-pronged. It's not just like some person purposefully saying, let me change the world, and they do something that's like maybe esoteric or like specific to them, but instead it's some person who's like actually trying to solve a problem of their life, right, in a way that they're interested in. And I think, like, we need new education systems, transport systems, ways of building, ways of making urban environments, for example, like urban planning, food, agriculture, like all this stuff. We need new ways of eating, like even restaurants, new kinds of community structure, all this stuff. Anything that interests you, like we basically need like soldiers in this fight. And the way that I think about it too, though, is like, there's also like this weird period, if this is like the graph, and one society is going down and another one simultaneously going up, there's a cross point where it's kind of awkward, and you're not in either. You know, and so, like, if I'm somebody who thinks that one is going down, another one's coming up, it's hard to convince these people like it's happening, you know what I mean? So then I'm just like, you know, just try anything, because once we get to this really low point, it's going to suck. Like, it's going to be horrible. A lot of people are going to struggle because they're, and we don't know how to live without this, you know, we haven't yet built this yet. And so we need like that, a lot of people working in this. So my whole effort is just trying to get more people, you know, like a little further along on this curve before they're forced to, you know, and then we have to go into the next one. So
that's beautifully said. Yeah, no, that's beautifully said, because we're trying to almost do that with like stories and myths, and like how, you know, people that are just going about their daily lives and, you know, their blue collar work and stuff, but then just doing a little bit every day. If you know, if we could provide an interview or an essay to make them trip over their own truths and, you know, all these kind of things, like, then that's a job well done in our book. So then let's talk about, I guess, I just want to add one thing to that point that you just said. I think it's also really important to reject the scale question that people ask about social change. They say, like, you have this idea. Well, if 7 billion people can't do it, then it's a failure of an idea. And it's like, and I personally think, like, it's the completely wrong approach to this thing. What you just said, one story, one episode, one interview, one piece that could make a moment that clicks for people. Like, basically we need to reject like the idea that every single thing needs to be as fast as possible and as much as possible, but instead accept the humility of incremental change, you know? And I think that's really cool, like, to just be like, I don't think I'm more important than I am. I just want to do my tiny little part to like make one little change, or if I could have one little person set on a slightly different trajectory because of something I said or wrote or something I demonstrated, like, that's okay. Like, that's good. That's actually a win. Like, that's a huge win for me, not just a little win, you know? Yeah. And I've been a part of that other side too, plenty of times. And through maturity, as you said, like, now we're getting to this like slow burn, you know, really building foundations of networks rather than trying to change things. And I think not to get too cliche with the African proverb, but it's like, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's a very interesting way to kind of just to prime your mind. And I guess the easiest way to do that now is you were just talking about fast and efficiency and all these other things that, you know, is part of this meta modern world. And so let's talk about someone that maybe changed our perspective on that, or at least been a big influence in me in the last year of resettling America and some other books, is Wendell Berry. So he's been a huge part of like this technological pessimism. If you really want to get to Luddism, you know, we'll talk about the differences of that. But really for me, it was like a technological, you know, realism, you know, taking the best highest on the bleeding edge of technologies, if it's useful, in the context of what you need, and then going about it. But then other than that, not going past the threshold. Because I think a lot of things that we've just been talking about is that we've been, playing hands that we don't have, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and then like with the profit motives and those kind of things, it's like, wait a second, if you don't make concrete good enough, you can't go past go to get profit. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of these things that just like shouldn't be happening, but just because of the sheer aggregateness of systems and systems upon systems, et cetera, like you said, the apathy of meta systems and things like that, we could really kind of bring in the empathy of this localized or bottom up kind of thing. And Wendell Berry has been one of those influences for me. So maybe let's talk about him and then any other influences that really had. I think you've had a recent podcast guest that I was in attendance to, that we can talk about her, and she's been kind of fighting the good fight as well. So maybe let's talk about some of those influences that really are trying to bring us back down to earth,
Yeah. So basically, like, I think in general, this is weird, but I think that like the Enlightenment, it goes back to the Enlightenment, which just basically says, our brains are so big and smart that we can control everything and know everything, and all it takes is us to invent our way out of problems. And so it's really just a matter of, it's a problem the human brain can solve, and we can basically solve our way out of basic human conundrums like death, like these
literally
kinds of
nothing, no subject is off, you know what I mean? Which in some way as a human, I'm like, okay, yeah, hell yeah, we're humans, like fuck it, but in another way, it's like, again, theory to practice. So
right, exactly. And I think what happens though is that you think it's just the human brain solving everything through science, but what's actually happening is that you're just externalizing costs. So I'll give you an example. Costs. So like Vandana Shiva, and this is similar to Wendell Berry's work, but Vandana Shiva, who we had on the Doomer Optimism podcast at the STOA, or series at the STOA, she is constantly fighting against Bill Gates, because Bill Gates wants to come into India and Africa, and he wants people to get off their peasant small holdings, which are wildly diverse and biodiverse and all these kinds of systems that they're basically unmeasured. People don't measure peasant ag. And a lot of times it's because, for example, they'll have a small garden. It's not standardized practices. They're doing everything different according to their own land and their own culture and all this stuff. And they'll have a garden, and then they'll run some ducks through it, or so it's multi-use and it's stacked functions. And so there's no way to collect data on that in the way that there is about, like, for example, pea protein, which is what is being used in these plant-based burgers. And so they'll say like plant-based burgers with pea protein and monocropped fields and chemical fertilizers and pesticides that are patented by corporations and require giant machines is more sustainable than what these peasants are doing. But it's obviously not. And so basically what happens is this technological religion says we've solved the problem of food and efficiency. The way that we've solved it is transforming fossil fuels into a bunch of other types of chemicals and using the soil as basically like a dead substrate to toss chemicals on that then patented food grows out of. And this is the way we make the most sustainable food in the world. We're geniuses, we've solved it. But it actually doesn't do any of those things. And the yields have gone down, all sorts of farmer suicides and all this sort of bad outcomes. But it's just externalized to the view of a lot of the policymakers. You just sort of think, oh, this is great, the data suggests this. And then, they don't see the peasant, the actual ways in which this affects peasant livelihood or biodiversity of non-domesticated animals on farms, for example, like the frogs and the lizards and the birds and all this stuff, they all die in a monocrop system. But that external cost isn't factored in to the overall analysis of sustainability. And so basically, I think like if you draw this stark contrast like that, you can see it so clearly. But I think people just sort of get they get blinded by the promise of science and technology. You know, they get blinded by the potential and the story that humans are so amazing that we can invent our way out of these fundamental problems, which the problem is, you know, you just have to work more. You have to do more work. A lot of people have to do more actual work. It's hard work, but it's also fulfilling work. And you can't really just make you know, like robot slaves do all of these things. There's external costs for all of that. And so yeah, to me, I think it's really just asking the question, like, is this the appropriate technology for the problem that we have? And having humility and not worshiping science so much, or not worshiping technology to the extent that it like it leads to an outcome that's the opposite of the goal you have. You know, what are your actual goals, and what's the way to get there? And I think people's first instinct, at least in the developed world among elite people, is like, what's the latest technology out there? And to me, that's sort of like this outgrowth of the Enlightenment, where, you know, religion is on the decline and Enlightenment thinking is on the rise. And the Enlightenment thinking more or less goes, we can solve this with our giant brains, and we should just basically worship ourselves and our own creations because we've solved all these problems. But I think, you know, that is really dangerous thinking for just a lot of other people in the planet. And so I think just like also recognizing that that is a belief system too, because people say like, trust the science, or like believe in technology or whatever. I'm like, I love the scientific method. I'm a scientist. What you're saying is religion.
Literally,
I mean, what you're saying a lot of times is literally religion. I mean, I'll say some scientific study that you are citing has been retracted, and that's how science works. They have to retract some things because of their methodology, and they'll say like, no, and like, you know, it's just.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like you say, hey, well, show me your work and stuff like that, and then they show their work, and it's not exactly the same thing, and it's like, wait a second, you're advocating this very, very. I would imagine, you know, you're very intense about this. A couple of things that came up with me, what you just said, I loved is what use cases are these technologies? I wrote an essay called Technopoly, which is about the book by Neil Postman, and you know, his whole thing was that, you know, any technology that comes in, we need to ask ourselves, you know, 7 questions, you know, what technology is it disrupting, you know? And a lot of these things, like you were talking about, is you know, ecosystems or systems that something fails, something springs up, and it's almost inevitable, you know. So it just really is a time horizon of when it happens. And so as these things come up, it's really about the values and the questions that we ask. But then also, like you said, is science has become this kind of scientism, you know, this very religious kind of upbringing of totality, you know, and that is something that I, even at first, just because it got reinterested in science and the beauty of all these kind of ways of thinking, and that we can put a body of work together and all these kind of, it's just wild shit if you really want to look at it in that way. But here's the problem that I want to ask you about, is that this last thing is like, if we have a savior complex now, you know, in a lot of things of science, it's like, well, we have some things that we need saving from, Ashley, you know what I mean? Not just climate change, but here's one technology that I want to see kind of how you parse this out and connect them, is the greatest technology of all is fusion energy, you know, and that's kind of like been lauded as this thing that's almost here, but that's been perennial, almost here for years and years. But then recently there has been some rumblings between the Chinese, you know, their fusion reactors, but whatever you want to call about state stuff with that. And then the ITER in France, they're building that for the last decade. So well, let's get into like kind of the different energy sources, you know, oil, gas, fossil fuels. We've gotten to somewhat of renewables. Oh, wow. Solar is kind of coming down. There's been a lot of those kind of things, but then we really need to get to the regenerative kind of thing. And then holy grail of energy sources for regeneration is the effing sun, you know what I mean? And so like, if we can do that here, then are all our problems solved? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what it is. So we're still on this path. And so let's just riff on that a little bit.
Sure. So the like cheap fossil fuels, when I realized what was happening with them, that has been like I don't know what the right word is, like some sort of framing idea for me. Like my whole life, I think a lot about like, does this thing exist because of cheap energy or not? And what does that mean for, all of these systems, for example? When I first realized like, oh yeah, fossil fuels are non-renewable. So like plastic gloves in hospitals, everything, you know what I mean? I'm just thinking
food containers,
like everything, everything like that we're just assuming will exist forever, like built our entire system around. I was listening to this podcast, at the Post-Carbon Institute, about net energy, and it's the same exact topic. It's basically like, I guess some of these manufacturing processes, and this is not my area of expertise, but some of these manufacturing processes require constant, they need to be constantly producing something. They can't stop, or the whole things in the system will like gum up and the whole system will break. So they require constant fossil fuel energy. And then this woman who was being interviewed was talking about how, for example, to make steel, like you have to have super, super high heat. And the only way to get that amount of high heat would be to like cut down so much of the world's forest to get like something equivalent to the high heat required for steel, that is allowed by liquid fuels. Then she was talking about how, for example, how we run trucks around the US, and the battery required to move a truck at the scale that they currently move in pounds, and I would know because I used to be a truck driver, is literally like the battery would take up the whole truck. All you would transport is the battery.
Yeah.
Because of course it would. Like you think about how much energy would have to be stored to move those things and the amount of pounds, but then the whole system just has to be a battery, because, and batteries take up weight. There's some mass to them. So just thinking about the scale of the problem, it's so overwhelming. Another point on this is one of my, I would say I'm in this intellectual lineage of this professor at University of Oregon, connected with a lot of the professors who trained me. His name's Richard York. He has written a lot about as any sort of alternative sources of energy get exploited in the modern era, so this is in the industrial era, our total energy use has just increased. There is no transition from one source of energy to another. There has only been addition. So as we look into alternative sources, we just add to our total amount that we're using. Because of course we're just animals, when I think about it that way, like the biological determinist side, like of course we would exploit every energy source we could possibly get our hands on.
Yep.
And then because a lot of that stuff is relatively cheap, that energy still, we make really, really stupid decisions with it. Like my example that I always say is shipping peaches from Chile to be packaged in
Thailand and come back to me in California. Let's go.
It's like who is choosing that? You know what I mean? So then when people say stuff like, well, we just need like nuclear energy or like some sort of alternative, like, first of all, we need to stop shipping peaches around the world. That's like, and that's just one example. Like everything is being shipped around the world like that. It's so stupid, just to exploit cheap labor costs, which is another like amount of exploitation. It's just human exploitation. And so to me, like, I would prefer us to not find a silver bullet that allows us to just easily transition to keeping the system as it is. Like it cannot continue as it is, even if we found a silver bullet, because there's ecosystem limits that come with that much energy use.
Right.
Like will be just other environmental disasters that come as a result of just using energy at this rate.
Right.
And so because that means you're pulling materials out of the earth to transform them and then throw them out at a different part of the earth, ostensibly. So basically I would like, and I think what is probably going to happen is we'll have some sort of energy decline, which we'll then adapt to. But if we could simultaneously find cleaner sources of energy or reusing already manufactured things to produce kinds of energy, using the sun to power things. I just think constantly about mills, just water wheels, like that's a source of energy. There are
it's
like
free. It's just sitting there.
There's so many other. There are things that have been used for energy in the past that we absolutely could go back to if we scaled everything down. So ideally, I would like to see a transition into a lower energy livelihood worldwide, that then coincides with some sort of solutions coming up with more sustainable forms of energy. I remain skeptical about just renewables in general. Like, what are the externalities? Like, what are the things that aren't being measured? I think there's a lot in electric cars and solar panels and wind turbines that are not being measured at all. They're just not being part of the calculation because people just want these things to be adopted. I read something about from this engineering journal about how like manufacturing those giant wind turbines and taking them down to service them, the amount of energy it takes to do that, to manufacture, transport, and service, makes them net energy neutral.
So it's really like, we're just getting
what
right
are we
back
doing?
to
like what are we doing? We're just using fossil fuels to pretend that we're making energy from these other things, and maybe they're better now. I don't know, but it's just like that. I think I'm so skeptical because I've read enough of these things where I'm just like, we just make such bad decisions as a species and a culture. Like, I don't really think that the people in charge are like responsible adults, basically. I just don't think they are. And so I don't think that they're like telling us the truth with these things. And so anyways, but I do think that like people are already finding ways to live more low carbon lives. And these are the people that I focus on, because I think like they're basically the ones innovating things and the ones we should look to in the future of low energy, I think.
And then let's move right into that. You were just talking about low carbon future, localism, things like that. Well, you wrote a book, Subsistence Agriculture. We've just talked about energy sourcing, regeneration, et cetera. So then let's maybe just set the stage for subsistence and regenerative agriculture, your book, talk about that. But then also we've kind of just glossed over, but now let's talk to the meat of what you do, is really turning that theory into practice. Is you run Rizoma Field School, which is, let's talk about the difference of the school, the foundation, but then I'm going to prime with some taglines that I think that really can hone in on people's remembrance of this. So like building a regenerative future. So again, like that requires agency to build something. It's not a renewable future, it's a regenerative future. And then also there is a future. We're not talking about the past and the present, stuff like that. So I love it. Again, more of the future is experimental learning for a resilient future. So again, like going into what we were just talking about, the real scientific method, the real Bayesian reasoning, real getting it out there, getting your hands dirty in the field with theory, that ultimate kind of marriage of science and humanity, et cetera. And then the thing that struck out at me is the time is now. That was very to what you're doing. So you can talk more about what the foundation is doing and what it's launched to, but it's really about sustainability, freedom, diversity, and health. Like you were saying, is that these systems, agriculture is not separate from energy, and it's not separate from humans, and it's not separate from society. So like, let's just kind of pull all those strands into one.
Yeah, sure. So regenerative agriculture, it's basically just a term. It's like a step beyond sustainable. Sustainable is let's just continue to sustain things as they are. Regenerative is how can we as humans live within ecosystems in ways that doesn't just sustain them and keep them how they are, but actually regenerates them, makes them better, healthier, stronger, more diverse, whatever. And there are historical precedents for this. And not just historical ones. There are people doing this that have been doing this that more or less just want to be left alone, but they have a lot to teach us. And a lot of knowledge is still held with a lot of people doing what I would define as regenerative agriculture. They probably wouldn't, and I think that's really important too, is to recognize that a lot of these terms are for disconnected people to try to make sense of the world, but
language, word salad.
And the people I'm talking about wouldn't use those terms, but it's just for me to try to translate like what I'm seeing and what what I think are the important points to this audience of people who are looking for solutions and are disconnected from them.
Yep.
So for me, I think it was really important. I did my dissertation work talking to people who self-produce food in Chicago, and it was just so cool what these people were doing. Just, I mean, for example, in a backyard in Chicago, this guy's got like ducks and turkeys and chickens and guinea fowl in the garage and a garden on every roof, and was trading eggs and having the ducks processed on a farm out of town, and going back and forth with manure and compost and vegetable boxes. And there was this one group in Chicago who took over this abandoned lot, and we're in the south side of Chicago near Calumet Harbor, which is a little lake, and they took in some people's boats that people were throwing out, and they took the boats and put it on the lot and filled the boats with soil. And so it's like repurposing things. And then the city of Chicago, a lot of people get Christmas trees processed from the city of Chicago and turned into wood chips. There's like a whole system to get them processed. So this group, they have nothing, they don't want, the city of Chicago doesn't want the wood chips, which is just insane if you think about it, like how valuable that resource is. But anyways, they were like, any person who requests wood chips, they'll go drop them up. They dropped off on this abandoned lot like several truckloads of wood chips. This is a former Sherwin-Williams paint factory, this lot. And they put the wood chips down, and the people in the lot, they inoculated the wood chips with mushrooms, because you can remediate like toxins with mushrooms. And so you inoculate them, and then that turns it into soil through their natural composting process. And so they were like experimenting with this, testing what was in it, and then testing like what soil came out at the end, and seeing what heavy metals, if any, remained, and that kind of thing. So amazing. Like, that's regenerative to me, and that's just some people in the city. There's a bunch of people in rural areas who have like this sort of like hunting conservation ethic and fishing conservation ethic. And it's like, how can I hunt and fish and produce for myself in a way that's respectful of the ecosystem, or make the ecosystem even better? And like, for example, deer populations are way out of control, out of balance, because there's not predators. And so lowering deer populations is better for the ecosystem, but that if you're somebody who's conservation minded and knows the ecosystem. And so learning all that, I was like, wow, there's so many cool people out there who are just absolutely unrecognized for their like really wonderful ways of relating to ecosystems. A lot of times these people are demonized, like hunters are demonized. And I just think, wow, like if people really knew the ways in which you related to your ecosystem and what you thought about these things, and what your goals were, the goals are regeneration. The same thing is true in Uruguay. And this is like, gets back to our principles versus practice thing. Like, the people share the exact same principles. The agroecological farmers we work with, who are part of our community in Uruguay, the same kind of principles, like, how can I produce food for my family, making the ecosystems that I work in better than they were before? And so that aha moment with the salmon scientists informed me wanting to take students on study abroad trips to like really work alongside these farmers and just get out there and see what they're doing. And so that's what the Field School is. The Field School, we've hosted student groups from Ohio State University, University of Idaho. We had a plan in place to host a student group along with a class from Washington State University, was my alma mater for my PhD. And they've loved it. I mean, it's been so rewarding. It's been so wonderful. Awesome. And it paused when the pandemic hit, and it hopefully will start again. But the students, just absolutely eye-opening experience for everybody. And basically, they go and work alongside the people, the farmers. The farmers identify projects for them to work on. They have some conversations back and forth. Why do you do things this way? And the insights that the students get are less about the farming than they are about the social system. Like, they see the neighbors come, the kids are around, everybody's lending a hand to one another. I mean, it's just part of this, network of people that only thrive by working together. And I love those insights. And then in the evening, I talk to them about sociology and say, like, why is this important? They ask me questions like, why are they doing things this way? And then I can help translate between the two worlds. I absolutely think that kind of model of education is essential. I think tons of people want to get onto farms. I think it should happen across the United States and across the world. There's tons of people who are getting into homeschooling now and taking their kids out of school. And like, I'm really interested in empowering farmers to build education programs into their model, because a lot of farmers are competing with like industrial agribusiness, and they could use supplemental income to teach the things that they're learning to students, because kids love this stuff, and even up to high school and college. And then the foundation is basically pulling together all of those insights and the work that I'm already doing to keep advancing these projects. So it's I'm trying to build these a curriculum that is just what I've learned from my time hosting students in Uruguay, that are hands-on experiences. Basically, how do you facilitate those experiences? What kinds of questions do you ask around them? What kinds of reflections, that kind of thing. And I'd like to do some sort of policy work to get that adopted as a sort of model for education. The Loconomy project is, I'm trying to get a software platform. I'm writing a grant now to get a software platform. And so I'm not really like a total Luddite, because I do think technology has a role in some things. And, people use the internet to find, for e-commerce. I was thinking it would be useful to have a technology platform for local producers. We'll start with food, but it can move on to other things. To upload their products and find customers and pick local distribution points and sort of strengthen local economies that way. So I'm writing.
You really do it from a totality, like a comprehensive way, right? That's been one of the things that people get, maybe this side, but they don't get the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you can search on Craigslist, or sometimes you can find somebody on Facebook Marketplace, but it's not like this whole marketplace that's specifically focused on a locality. This is about buying in whatever the south suburbs of Chicago, where I am now, for example. So it would be really focused on localizing supply chains. And to me, I'm not a purist about this kind of thing. I think, like, even if it came from New Hampshire to Chicago, it would be an improvement on Chile to China to Chicago. Right. So I'm like just we're so far out of whack, like anything that goes in this direction. And I think that a lot of times environmental people are very purity politics. They'll be like, absolutely. If this isn't the perfect solution, like, how do you define local? It's like, it literally doesn't matter. We're literally sending things tens of thousands of miles around the world. It's so stupid. Let's just go in the other direction and keep building systems in this that tend toward this direction, and hopefully we'll be better. It's like, I don't know. It's funny, the different worlds that I inhabit. So Rizoma Foundation is basically just trying to, from a nonprofit point of view, it's really important to me that it's nonprofit, to approach these different problems and not, for example, Loconomy, I could have tried to approach it as like a VC startup type thing. Sure. But then your incentive structures are crazy. Like who you're hiring. You owe your life to these people who gave you money, and they want their returns, and it's super high risk, and it makes your whole system built around maximizing profit for these investors. Whereas I believe if we build it as a nonprofit, pilot it as a sociologist, meaning asking people how they're actually using it and building a tool that's useful for actual people, as opposed to how can I squeeze the largest amount of money out of these people. But instead, how do I build, if my principle is how do I build a tool that advances local economies and helps people, access local food or sell local food, then I could maybe transform it into some sort of cooperative whose incentive structure is then to help the people who are the actual users and to put money back into the community. But I think those incentive structures really matter for the way these different institutions are built. And when I learned how VC funding works, which I literally just learned these past months, like talking to people on my team who are into tech, I was like, this is sociopathic. I can't believe how this works. Like, I can't believe that this is like the assumption of how you fund things and how it has to grow and all this stuff. So shout out to PJ Connolly, because he's really helped me to parse the different options that are out there and come to this conclusion that this is the right way to approach it.
Right. No, that's awesome, because it ties a lot of threads together that you've been working on, because it seems like not just like homesteading and even now education, but then the localism aspect like pervades through that. But then now I think we can kind of go into what you've been known most recently on Twitter the most of is doomer optimism. So maybe we can talk about how that, kind of sprung up and things, but we'll go specifically into a couple of things. I just want to kind of prime it as well. Like, so we live in the Anthropocene, now we are in a different fossilized record, like it is going to show up somehow, those plastics, all that stuff to aliens, to future humans, who the fuck knows, whatever, but climate degradation's big, everything's kind of ecosystem and species extinction. Everyone says we're part of the next big extinction. So then that just kind of sets the tone of like the seriousness of what just Earth is going through. I mean, we might never need to save Earth, because Earth doesn't need saving. It's really us that we need to save. And then we kind of briefly talked about Cosmo-Localism with the scales, because I think, as you said, the importance of localism and how that's perceived in different cultures, different localities, different people, but then also some principles, maybe not a top-down thing, but maybe a bottom-up. And then that goes into what I've kind of written about, the updated operating manual for Spaceship Earth. Buckminster Fuller's previous book in the 60s was really kind of again, he was trying, principles, kind of like, here's a book to do something. Well, now it's not going to be a book. Now it's going to be thousands and thousands of local cultures, put together in some type of edifice or framework or something. And that's really what's going to be an updated operating manual for Spaceship Earth moving forward. Managed retreat, maybe some of that we had talked about, our different technological futures, dealing with the Anthropocene, dealing with climate change. Right. Well, we're either going to deal with it coherently or not. So right. It doesn't really matter. And then solar punk, which is kind of the Miyazaki, Studio Ghibli, kind of like getting past our traditional sci-fi dystopic Blade Runner, that kind of aspect, and really trying to, again, technological futures. If we can think of technological dystopias, why can we not think of maybe not technological utopias, and maybe not utopias at all, but more coherence, more, more flourishing.
Positive. Yeah. And a positive vision.
Yeah. And then lastly, retroactive public goods funding. So before all of our industry, business, everything is about like profit incentives. How can we make a buck right now, and not just make a buck right now, but this quarter, this day. And so maybe doing like more public goods and really doing out rewards of value and such. Now, I don't know exactly how that happens, and it doesn't really matter, but these kind of ideas are something that we're doomed, but we're optimistic about it. You know what I mean? Like as ecosystems die, further ecosystems arise. So let's just kind of set that tone.
Yeah, sure. So doomer optimism is right. It's exactly what you said. It's basically like, recognizing the challenges of the time that we're in, but finding ways to thrive despite the challenges or because of the challenges. I think there's also something to be said about, we don't want this system to keep going. Like, it's not going well. People are not happy. They're depressed. There's an epidemic of suicide. Like, people don't have access to the goods and services they need to thrive. If our goal is, if our principle is just human thriving, we're not doing well. Right. And so what alternatives can we seek out that can help to be aligned with those principles that we have? Like, how can we thrive as a species, as a culture, as individuals, in the home, all of those different things, but in balance with nature. And the way that I approach doomer optimism in general, and I think there's been some critiques on Twitter, because I think in general, as soon as a term arises, somebody says like, this is what it is. No, this is what it is. Or these are
contrarians come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, it's just like, I know, it's just like, well, doomer optimism is a leftist thing, or it's a statist thing, or I'm like,
we don't even know what it is. We don't even know what it is.
Me and Jason literally don't know. It happened because me and Jason were just like riffing on Twitter together. We just met on Twitter, you know, and we just get along so well. And he was saying something along the lines of like, yeah, I'm a doomer, I recognize that, but you know, I'm optimistic despite it all. And I think I responded to that, like doomer optimism unite, or doomer optimism for the win, or something. And that's how it was born, because it was just basically like him describing his own, you know, process, which resonates with me. And to me, the right approach to something like this, it's not really a movement, it's a description of things that people are already feeling and doing. The right approach is to just bring a lot of people in to talk to one another. There are people way far on the tech side of the spectrum, or the cryptocurrency people, who are like that. That's not exactly my wheelhouse, but you're welcome. Like, I'd love to have a conversation about that. I'm not closing any doors. I think that there's a lot of potential in a lot of those principles, and a lot of those people are guided by the same principles I am. So let's get together, let's have a conversation. You inform me, I'll inform you about our different perspectives and our ways of approaching things. Like I said, we all just need like kind of small projects to work on that we love, you know? So I think like if you already love it and you care about it and you advocate for it, having a community or an umbrella with which to discuss like the thing you love and you want to bring other people into, you know, I'm thinking about this Tolstoy quote from Anna Karenina about how, you know, basically we're all just arguing all night, and there's all these intellectual people in the book and arguing all night. But what it comes down to is they just like want other people to understand what they love. And it is true. I mean, you get down to it, you're arguing about things. It's like, I really just love spending time in nature with people who love nature and beautiful gardens. I love that. Like it comes down to it, I'm just like, you know, peasant agriculture, blah, blah, blah. I really just love this. I think it's beautiful, you know, and I want to share the thing that I love with other people. And so, yeah, doomer optimism is that to me. It's just like, yeah, some people just love Bitcoin. It's okay. Like, let them love it. Let them advocate for it. Like, let's just talk about it. Let's and talk about the merits and let's everybody have a space to talk about what they love. And so I think there's a really important distinction though to be made from running away from or running toward.
That's a good.
And I think a lot of times the doomer thing is I'm running away from, or I'm mourning the loss of. And it's okay to be both. You know, it's okay to both mourn a way of life that, you know, you've grown up in or become used to or helped make you who you are.
Good point. Give validation to that, because a lot of people don't.
And it's like, it's okay to mourn. It's okay to be in denial. It's okay to be angry that the system that you trusted and relied on is not trustworthy or reliable anymore. And then, you know, running toward what it is, the world you want to see. And I think, like I said before, like that dual process, it's really awkward. I mean, it's awkward for a lot of us, and people will say like, you're a hypocrite, or this is not a pure thing, or you don't have a solution that's like holistic. And no, none of us will. Like the whole idea is that we're all just kind of feeling around in the dark, seeing what comes next. I think like the solar punk stuff is that too. Like it's all just a mishmash, and I think it's okay that it's incoherent. I think like the point is to embrace the exploration and experimentation, not to try to imagine a coherent set of things in advance. Because I think that's, you know, people who are keyboard warriors, they're very good at that. Imagining a very
self-fulfilling prophecy. It's and then we get there real quick, and it's like, wait, how do I?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like they're just not field tested. That people don't think about that, and they're really good at telling you how you're incoherent or telling you how their vision is perfect, but their vision has not been tested, and so it's probably not going to happen. And a lot of people are very good at imagining utopias, and not very many people historically have been very good at enacting utopias. It's okay to be incoherent, to be sloppy, but I think the goal, I think, is really just to move toward something and to keep learning. You know, for example, my journey has been, I'm, you know, thinking 20 years ago thinking like solar panels are the best possible thing, or maybe more like 10 years ago. And then now I'm thinking, okay, how can we work with natural systems? For example, this woman who I love, Tao Orion, was posting about how she culls her forest in a way that's different from the way that forest is clear cut, and probably produces more energy, like, you know, total wood energy, the way she does it than the way the clear cut people do it, even though they say that's more efficient. Like thinking about those different systems that might exist and that we might experiment with, I think is really important. And I don't know, and then just learning where you're wrong. I think it's okay to like revise and keep growing and that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm open to any and all of the above. I think there's some people who've contacted me who are like neo-monarchists. Like, okay, I don't know. Like,
I'm new here. Guys.
I don't know what neo-monarchy is. I don't know what that is, but it's fine. Like, okay, maybe, because there is something about the monarchy that's like that breeds a kind of like pride and distinction.
I see.
Like, so, and I don't really know that much about it. Like I said, I don't want to like make opinions about things I don't know about, but it's a big tent in that, you know, I think if we're guided by similar principles, everybody's got a different way that they think maybe we'll get there. It takes all types, you know, we're just going to have to keep trying all these different things and see how it goes.
That's great. Okay, well then let's transition into how we actually make that a reality. We've talked briefly about trying to, you know, make a little short film about some doomer optimism, and a lot of this, you know, will probably be the voice underneath of some of it. But how do you really, like, for us, we're gonna, I guess this is a proof of concept of theory into action, is, you know, we want to take this kind of idea and run with it. And you actually have had some experience in filmmaking, and you had some film theory classes and things like that. We kind of riffed on that. And so I guess let's get a little bit niche, but we can also stay up as well. But like, how can film or stories specifically, or maybe, I don't know, because today we live in such a digital world, and it is our kind of environment that, you know, we might as well put some better things out there than maybe, you know, constantly just redoing the MCU universe, you know, and stuff. It's like, you know, like original ideas and things like that. And so we've, like, you know, as journalism has tanked in the fourth estate and like entertainment monopolies and all this stuff, those ecosystems are going down. But hey, that's what we just saw. We're trying to do our own, is like we're coming up in our production company and our kind of things. And I don't want to say we're going to Cannes anytime soon or win any Oscars, but like, man, like there is ripe for these kind of things, and the advent of TikTok and all this stuff. So I really want to talk to you about not just your future projects. Let's definitely talk somewhat about what you're kind of doing moving into the future, but then also maybe a little bit more, you know, kind of a lens, if you will, of kind of how storytelling, myth making, digital stuff, even using some of those technologies to capture this, and then not just capture, you know, highfalutin society, academia, whatever, but then, you know, Joe Brewer down in Bariacha, Colombia, you know, he's still writing on the internet and taking pictures and stuff. So and then you in Colombia, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So let's,
yes. So basically, my bachelor's level thesis paper was about political mimesis, which is basically like, how do you, brought on by documentary films, and the film I was talking about was An Inconvenient Truth, and the idea was, I did a reception history, which is, how are people receiving this movie? Like, what's happening in the real world as a result of this film? And at that time, this organization, MoveOn.org, was a big organization, and people were planning house parties where they screened the film and then discussed it, and then met other people. And I went to a lot of these house parties and interviewed people, and I went to the opening screening of the film, and Al Gore was there, and I think like Leonardo DiCaprio was there, and I had this really curious perspective about how film makes change in the world, and like what is actually happening when people are sitting in this dark room and their brains are turning, and then they leave the dark room. It's almost like Allegory of the Cave, out into the real world, and like the flickering on the screen, how does it relate to what's outside the cave? And I think to me, what's most powerful about film and really good storytelling is what it makes you do, how it makes you relate to the world outside of the dark room. And like, to me, the interesting and potentially impactful or impacting social change aspect of media in general is, how do we get people to then like really go do stuff or relate to the world differently as a result of having seen this film. I also think in general, there's way too much of an emphasis on storytelling or narrative making, as if me telling the story in this way would make people think about narratives in some certain way. Like basically the way I think narratives get constructed is people have experiences and then they construct stories backwards. Usually they try to make sense of it. Something weird happened, and then they'll be like, yeah, this thing happened, must have been blank. You know, they'll come up with some sort of explanation. Very rarely do we get to implant the way in which people think about stories. And in some ways it's a little bit of a top-down elite way of thinking about things. Like, we just need to make people, and I hear this a lot in sociology groups, we just need to make people think like turning off the water when they brush their teeth is cool, or something like that. That's the level they're working at. You know, they just need to think flying is horrible or eating meat is horrible. We need to change the narrative. And it's like this very top down, like, we need to make them think something is good or bad. And I personally think the more impactful, I won't even say the right way, but probably the more impactful thing is to get people to have experiences. This is why I run the field school like this. Get them to have some experience. And that experience can be a film. And then to explain it to them backwards, to help them to make sense of it. So like when the students are with the student group, or the student groups are with the agroecological farmers, they're like, I don't understand this. And then I'll be like, the reason they're doing this is because they're building topsoil and increasing biodiversity, and they're really care about these things. So I help them to make sense of it looking backwards, and then they can say to themselves, like, these are the real change makers. Like, these are the people we need to be looking to for environmental solutions, because I helped them to make sense of that experience. Same thing with film. I think if you can help people to integrate their experience or their thought back into what is something that I can then apply to my real life, or what are the takeaway points? Like, if I were to say anything, and we can get into this, primed for it already, like the takeaway points to anyone listening to me, like the whole point of me being out there doing things on Twitter, doing podcasts, and ideally our film, is to get people to integrate this particular experience, this particular conversation, to think, what is my thing that I love? What is my thing that I can do, that I can move toward? And I also really, really advocate for people to find other people who love the thing they love. I think that in my dissertation research, all these people who started keeping chickens, they found one another in Chicago, and then they started the Chicago Chicken Coop Tour.
Amazing.
And then all these other people came to visit their coops, and there will be kids, and they're like, oh my God, chickens, I've never seen this before. I've grown up in Chicago my whole life.
And a movement is born.
And then it's like amazing. And then all these other chicken keepers come check out other chicken keepers' backyards. And there's like, where did you get this coop? Or what did you think of doing things this way? And blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, oh man, wait, you have bees too? How does that work? And then it becomes this thing, like, and it really is a thing where you not only make friends, you admire other people's work, who do things that you like to do too. And people just want excuses to get together. And then once you have this community of people, they'll really go to bat for one another, and they'll really take care of one another. And I think fundamentally what most of us are just seeking is belonging,
belonging is huge. Yeah.
And meaning, and so I think if the goal of a film is to show the ways in which I've found meaning and belonging, to empower you to find meaning and belonging in this really simple, straightforward, do something practical. There was this thread on Twitter from this guy Mash Ton Timmy, who was talking about building or brewing beer with his friends. He's from Michigan.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was just doing something that he likes to do with 5 friends, and the way he talked about it, it was like it literally brought tears to the eyes of many of the people who read it, because it was just like, that's all we're looking for, is just connection and belonging, meaning, making things, doing something with your hands that results in some real thing. So to me, yeah, if any of this, the Doomer Optimism film, the tweeting, any of it leads to helping people like find that, or at least just take a step onto that path, that would be the goal.
Amazing. And a lot of things came up with that, but let's maybe tone for the last question. Maybe we hone in a little bit more into that. But what I was thinking is, it's so funny because when making films and like kind of like making you way to feel like as a director, like you really do kind of want to set the stage, you want to set the tone, but it's really, I mean, so there are very specific films, I guess, if you really want to like hone in and tell someone like what this is and what it's about and et cetera. Okay, I get that, like whatever. Yeah. But obviously, or honestly, for me, I think that's way more towards like the propaganda type of like, you will think this way, you will do this way, whatever. And then when we're going over here, what we're saying is almost like, well, we're more in the inception business. And I know the movie Inception is kind of, you know, it's like, we're more in the inception business of like, it doesn't really matter what the hell you're doing. You could be into water retention services or chicken coops or, you know, auto mechanic stuff, like, et cetera. It does not matter what you're doing. It's just, you need the tools, the education to be going out that, because then, like you just said, one of the most human things and one of the most amazing things to feel is like when someone else is passionate about whatever it is, you know what I mean? And so that is an infectious, contagious thing. And so I guess I can set this up as the overview effect question. A lot of people on my channel know about the overview effect. It's when the astronaut literally looks down onto space or onto Earth from space. Now, a lot of the stuff we've seen this recently in the news with Jeff Bezos and these billionaires trying to get here to do that. And that's a whole nother podcast. So I don't really want to get into all that kind of stuff. But if you really, I mean, you've kind of talked about it. What films, Doomer Optimism, what can these things do? But for me, what I wanted to ask you is this kind of overview effect question of what you would say to the world if you were kind of experiencing this is for me, I think what you and Joe and a lot of these people reassess our kind of like lens is to reintegrate what it is, a place, et cetera, to us. Is what is the least common denominator? Now, I know that's very cliche, and I know that's very like, you know, you can get into categorization and compartmentalization and stuff. But really, for me, it's like, I think that inception is like, if we really want to get down to it, the lowest common denominator is each individual human. We have 7-8 billion people on the planet. Well, if you get down to it, we're all just humans. So then what are the practical kind of things, advice that you would give to people of all stripes of life, not just in the United States, not just in India, but, you know, maybe some random mechanic in Sweden or, you know, a bicyclist in Brazil that kind of cuts through the scale, the family, the culture, the industry, the government, the bullshit, the labels that we put on ourselves. So I guess I will leave this as your parting words, if you will, for this, of what kind of practical advice, what kind of things that you would say? Yeah,
so I think it's really key, and this, my travel really helped me with this, like to see, you know, a lot of us are striving for the same kinds of things. We want connection, we want self-determination or freedom, you know, we want some sort of meaningful livelihood, and we want you know, connection with nature and I guess peace with that comes with that. And I think I get, to me, like the thing that keeps coming up for me is this concept of interdependence, the ways in which we are all dependent on one another, is really like both a black pill and a white pill. I mean, it's so beautiful, but also like so terrifying, really, because I think we're you know, what happens with one of the students I had, we're talking with one of the students who came to Uruguay, we're talking with the farmer, my friend Paola, and she's talking about Monsanto and the destruction it's caused in Uruguay. And she was like, and the student was like, my dad does like all the IT systems for Monsanto. And it was like, yeah, like your dad is, I mean, he's just a cog in a wheel, right? And, you know, he's just building the systems, is not really deciding what the systems do, but, you know, what he's doing there in wherever, I think San Francisco, is impacting this Paola, this woman in Uruguay, and many other people around the world. That's the black pill, you know, just like the ways in which our, I think it's really important to think about when in a global society, the ways in which our choices, or, you know, the what we do in life impact others, which is overwhelming. And I think that's the doomer part. The white pill part is, what we really need to get out of this is what we want anyways. You know, a lot of people just want, it's not a hard sell. Like the kind of future that I'm trying to sell, it's like good on so many different levels. I mean, it's good. It's like, it's pleasant. It's nice. You feel connected. You feel belonging. It's meaningful. You're producing something that also makes you feel good. Like you have friends, you have community. You know that this is what we're striving for. It's hard to move from that to this. You know, it's hard to move from externality. I don't really know or care how my actions impact other people in the world, toward you know, how can I become more interdependent and build this world that I want to live in for myself and for all the other people. And when you realize like there's really no way to do it by yourself, it's both scary and freeing, you know, where you're just like, I can't do this alone. Like there's no way to do it alone. So better get out there and start figuring out like, who are my allies and who can I work with to make this thing happen, because I have no other choice really. And that is a good and important thing too, to just like recognize that having no other choice is an inevitability.
It's liberating. For one thing, it's like, it gets back to that doomer optimism. It's like, well, if you gotta feel some type of way, you might as well feel that type of way. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And so you really, and then, you know, I think just taking that knowledge with responsibility, like it's my responsibility now to just kind of make this world I want to live in, not just for myself or my own kids or my own family, but for everybody around me, because I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be able to do this alone. And kind of being intuitive and respectful in that act of co-creation. Like I said before, it's like, it's very messy and awkward. It's going to be messy and awkward, and that's okay. It's not going to be pure. But it is going to at least move us toward where we want to be. It's not going to be perfect. We might not even get where we want to be in our lifetimes, but we're going to be better off at the end of the lifetime than we were before. We'll have made strides in the right direction, and that is literally all you could do. So yeah, that'll be my parting words.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations. Love to have you again sometime soon. If we don't see each other, you know, in Chicago, we might see each other in North Carolina soon. So appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, until next time, Ad Astra.